The much anticipated Eastern Europe lands of the Rus are on display today with the latest Tinto talks for Europa Universalis 5. I have to say I'm a little bit disappointed. I've so far really enjoyed pretty much every single dev diary because they were extremely accurate from a historical standpoint. However, it really pains me to say this, but out of all the dev diaries, this is the most historically inaccurate one I've seen so far. There's a lot of inaccuracies. I'm gonna go through them today. We're gonna see what they say in the dev diary, and then we're gonna talk about what's actually not supposed to be the way that it's portrayed in this particular dev diary and why that is. And I'm going to back up everything I say with historical sources, and I'll leave some books in the comment section, in the description. Actually, you can check the books for yourself out, and if you have time, I recommend you read the full books. They're actually really great books on one of the most interesting time periods of Russian and Eastern European society. That being said, it does seem like Eastern Europe is going to be a buttload of fun. And I kind of suspect that some of these historical inaccuracies are probably because of balance reasons. I'm not sure, but maybe we'll find out in the future. Who's to say? Alright, so this dev diary here is presented by Pavia. He says, as an introductory note, we're considering today the Russian core, which in 1337 comprises the different Russian principalities as far as the White Sea to the north and the Ural Mountains to the east. The lands that would later be incorporated into the Russian Empire will be covered in future into a map. Otherwise, we would cover like 1/8 of the landmass in one dev diary. So yeah, they cover basically the areas around Muscovy and so on. I have to ask though, if anyone from the dev team will answer, I'd appreciate it, but it's fine if they don't answer. I'll find out in the future myself. Does this actually mean the Golden Horde areas are not actually scripted? Because then I retract my my initial statement that it's extremely historically inaccurate, because there's a lot of inaccuracies in the principalities themselves. Pavia says Russia is divided into several principalities in 1337. The dominant one is probably Muscovy, as its Grand Prince Ivan I Danilovich Kalita, which means money bags, and he is actually one of the most important figures in Russian history, by the way. He is also the Prince of Nizhny Novgorod and Kostroma, and of Novgorod by election in this case. He also holds the title of Grand Prince of Vladimir, bestowed by the Khan of Golden Horde, which makes him the ruler enforcing the Tatar yoke over the Russian principalities, which in our game is represented through an international organization. The coloring of the different countries is different tones of yellow, as they are tributaries of the yoke. From this is just my understanding, okay? Only the nations that have a different shade of yellow are tributaries, not all of them. So now to zoom in here, here's my little bit of a gripe, starting with the whole tributary situation, okay? Yes, indeed, the principalities shown with different shades of yellow are indeed tributaries of the Golden Horde. However, Vyatka, Nizhny Novgorod, Karachev, I know firsthand, were also tributaries. There were some that did not pay tribute. There's a book called A History of Russia, Volume 1 up to 1917 by Walter G. Moss that backs me up with this. Belozero did not pay tribute, so that's accurate. That's actually accurate. Pskov did not pay tribute. The Grand Republic of Novgorod did not pay tribute also. Galish also did not pay tribute, and Galish should be shown on the map as its own individual entity as well. It's currently integrated. Also, highly debatable whether Polotsk and Vitebsk should be shown on the map, because they were extremely integrated into the Lithuanian crown in 1337, whilst indeed Smolensk, Rzhev, all of these other boys over here, they were a lot more autonomous. Actually, very autonomous. I would even say that I don't know what kind of levels of autonomy you will have in EU5. Probably the highest level of autonomy, if you ask me. Now, I also like the fact that in the north we have a lot of uncolonized land. That is very accurate. So in 1337, the Swedes technically did lay claim to the lands over here portrayed, which is in the Finnish areas, but they didn't actually control those lands. There was a lot of migrating Finnish tribes, Karelian tribes, all sorts of different schmagadaboobs around those areas that were extremely autonomous, on par with Perm, which is why if we show Perm as an actual country, you should also show Finland as an actual country, or don't show either of them then. because that would be more accurate if you ask me. Within the next 100 years, it became a lot more centralized, the Finnish realms, with Novgorod and Sweden asserting their authority over these areas. And as we have in 1444, that is actually an extremely accurate depiction of what it would be like. But yes, 100 years earlier, 1337, it would be basically no man's land Europe edition. And now, to be very precise, if you want to read on the principalities of Murom and Ryazan, the two in the south, there's a really good book about that actually by L.S. Tikhomirov that's actually called The Principalities of Murom and Ryazan. So really great book if you have the time for it. It also portrays how these two particular principalities were at the time. It's accurate. They did pay tribute at the Golden Horde. This area is definitely accurate. Also, Vladimir was the principality, the grand principality of Vladimir. Technically the one that was gathering all the tribute from all the other Russian principalities, putting it in one big pile, and then taking it over to the Golden Horde. And indeed, Ivan did conquer the principality of Vladimir by 1337, and Ivan was from Muscovy, which is why Muscovy is shown here as the entirety of the Vladimir principality. This is actually pretty well done. He did, yes, also have control over Kostroma and Nizhny Novgorod. He was granted the title of Grand Prince of Vladimir by the Khan himself, the only one that could actually grant said title. And there was a little bit of a struggle at the time between him and the various princes of Tver, I think Mikhail, some guy with weird eyes, and Alexander II. So he won that, and then he basically became the ultimate Pokemon in the area, and that essentially led to Muscovy becoming the superpower that it would become in just a few years later, well, a couple of 100 years later, really. The reason that he's actually called the money bag is because he made Muscovy ridiculously rich. Prior to him, the Duchy of Muscovy was not the one taking all the money from everybody else and sending it to the Golden Horde. It was whoever was the Grand Prince of Vladimir. Vladimir was right next to Muscovy. Muscovy was just a little duchy compared to the big Vladimir. So once he got control of Vladimir, he basically, since he was from Muscovy, just said, yeah, so this is not Vladimir anymore, guys. This is Muscovy. Although technically it was still Vladimir, we do refer to it as Muscovy because Muscovy became the prevalent authority after his rule. Also, just to point out, Galish did become a part of Muscovy, but not in 1337. It happened in 1340, 3 years later. So why is Galish not shown on the map? That's the real question. Now, when it comes to the political map, aside from what I said, everything else seems to be okay, so take it as you will. If you like more Western-friendly sources, you can read the book The Emergence of the Rus 750 to 1200 by Simon Franklin and Jonathan Shepard, or hell, you can even read Medieval Russia by Janet Martin. I think it's actually Medieval Russia 980 to something, 980 to 1500 something, I don't remember, but yeah, that's the book. I will write these afterwards in the description if you really want to check this out. So now back to the dev diary, because we took a little bit of a detour there to talk about that bit. So let's finish what Pavia said. The main other power in the region is the Grand Republic of Novgorod, with a completely different institutional structure that allows them to pick their rulers. Their power comes from being the main trading power between the Baltic Sea and the Russian region, and is the overlord of the two countries, Principality of Pskov and Oreshek, a buffer country in Karelia, as agreed with the Swedes after a recent war. That is accurate. I like to see that. Several lands to the north and east are not owned by any country. As a final note, you may also see that Lithuania is the overlord of some of the principalities, some of them directly through the Gemininids rulers, Polotsk and Vitebsk, okay, whilst others, other Rurikovich rulers, Smolensk and Rizhov. Yeah, that's fair. All right, now let's see the diplomatic map mode here. So this is the international organization, basically the Russian principalities that are paying tribute to the Golden Horde, with the Muscovites themselves being shown with the blue, because they are the ones that are collecting the tribute from everybody else and then shipping it off to the Golden Horde. And I suspect that we're gonna have an option to not send all the tribute to the Golden Horde and keep some of that for ourselves, because that's literally how Ivan became money bags. He was skimming a lot of that moolah, if you know what I mean, and every other Muscovite ruler afterwards did the exact same. Okay, now hold on a second. I'm a little bit confused here, because what is this? Oh, this is all the lands owned by Ivan, isn't it? Yes, I think it is. All right, I was gonna say, does this show that Novgorod also paid tribute? All right, now we have the dynasties. Also, we have Vyatka, Kerdinin, Karachev, and of course Rurikovich, pretty much everywhere here. Descendants of Rurik, the founder of the Rus. Rurik was a Varangian, actually, that in 862 was invited to rule the Novgorodians, and from there you have what you have in 1337. Let's just say that Rurik had had a very fertile penis. That's probably the best way I can put that, isn't it? Seed spread. Maybe that's less cringe. Several branches of the House of Rurik ruled over the Russian lands. Fun fact, we have 18 different branches portrayed in the game, the exceptions of a few principalities and the ruler of Karelia, Prince Narimantas of the Lithuanian Geminids. Also, the Kievan and Vyatka are randomly assigned dynasties, as we haven't been able to get the data for those countries in 1337. Well, as far as I know from reading the Emergence of the Rus, there is no actual Vyatka leadership mentioned anywhere, so it would be impossible to know who was in charge of Vyatka at the time. It's not written anywhere. It was various local rulers. It was not Rurikovich, so we know that. Now we have the locations here. We're showing a less detailed map this week because Russia is big. Feel free to ask for more detailed screenshots on specific areas we'll try to provide. We're also showing parts of the steppes, Finland, Kola, because of the scale of the map. Take them as unavoidable spoilers, as we'll talk more in depth about those areas in future Tinto maps. Okay, good to know. And now we also have the provinces map mode. That is a buttload of provinces. Super happy to see that. I do love me a huge amount of provinces, that's for sure. The more the merrier, really. As you would expect, the terrain is mostly Arctic in the north and continental in the middle, and then we probably have some type of arid or steppe or something of the sorts in the south bits. Then it is pretty much all of it flatlands, with certain small areas that are marshes to the north and some hills here and there, with hills and likely mountains in the Urals right next to them. Then we got forest to signify that it was heavily forested or heavily wooded in the north, and then less wooded, less forested in the center, which is why it's woods and grasslands, and then sparse and grasslands in the south, because that's where the steppes come into play, and the reason why the Golden Horde is around to play as well. Really happy to see that they depicted the Komi people. That's really great. That is super accurate. Love that. Then let's check this out, see what Pavia says first. Cultures. As in other regions, we decided to have 3 different cultures in the Russian region: Muscovite, Novgorodian, Muscovite, and Severian. The design here is different than the Ruthenian region because Russia was more politically divided in the High Middle Ages and would later be more culturally unified later on, whilst in Ruthenia the situation would be the opposite. In any case, the 4 of them are East Slavic cultures. Wait, what do you mean the 4 of them? I only see 3: Muscovite, Severian, Novgorodian. Is there another one? I don't see. Is it meant the blue bit here? Is that the Ruthenian and East talking about Ruthenian, a part of the same? Yeah, okay, that makes sense now. Apart from that, there are a bunch of different cultures bordering the region: Karelian, Pomor, Komi, Udmur, etc. We might add some more minorities of these cultures in the feedback pass after this dev diary. Also, take into account the minorities over the Tatar lands. Currently, the Kazani and Mishari cultures are not yet done. Okay, so in that case, I'm going to take it a little bit less heavy with my feedback in the south, because I was about to tear this dev diary in half because of how inaccurate the Schnaps is in the south. But I'm going to be a lot more polite now, because he mentioned this, that it's not fully ready. So we have to keep that into account, of course. Somebody did do a lot of research on the cultures here. That is a guarantee. I like that. Here's my gripe with this. My only gripe, actually. Why is Severian here? So Severians would have been basically like a border transitionary culture, let's say, in the 10th, 11th century between the Muscovites, Ruthenians, and so on. I don't know to what extent I would make it in the 14th century, 1337 Severian, as maybe, I mean, I'm not saying no. I'm not super educated on the complete cultural makeout of Eastern Europe in 1337, but I do know that Severian is kind of a weird choice, and it's a really big group from what I can tell here. I'm not sure how accurate this would be. I'm also not super documented on this, so I don't want to make any mistakes and say stuff I'm not super aware of, which is why I would appreciate it if you guys, if you're more educated on this Severian topic, the Severian culture, than I am, let me know in the comment section. I'd appreciate it. If you have any references, any books I can read on this, I would appreciate that also, actually. Now, I want to mention something really cool in the eastern part. So the Komi people, they're the actual indigenous people that lived in the Perm area since, like, as long as we can track them back, right? But then these guys, the Udmur, they're actually Finno-Ugrics. That means that at some point the Finns, oh, wrong map, we're back to the good one. So yeah, at some point the Finns, when they started their migration from Finland, they went all around the north and they ended up over here, and then a part of the Finns that ended up here, the Magyars, migrated more all the way into the Pannonian Basin. This happened a few hundred years prior to this particular start date, and I'm sure everybody knows about the Magyar migrations, but just funny and also accurate to see that Finland, oh sorry, Finnish and Udmurt is in the same culture group. I love that. That's actually, I'm assuming that means the same culture group, right? Because they have really similar map colors. Maybe it doesn't mean that, I don't know, but they should be basically in the same culture group, the Finno-Ugric culture group. There's still Udmurt people living in Russia today, for that matter. There's like a few 100,000 of them, if I'm not mistaken. Now, when it comes to the religious map mode, oh my boy, is this a shapaise. I mean, a real shapaise. Before I do my own analysis, Pavia says that Eastern Orthodoxy is dominant in the region. That is true. Although there are other religions in the area, such as Animist, Tingris, Shamanist as a wide category, we'd like to add a little bit more granularity for them, although that will come at a later year. Don't expect that to be added in coming Tinto maps, maybe the later ones, okay? We've already seen some posts asking about Slavic paganism. Up until now, we've considered Russian people to be Christianized. Okay, I hope they're not going to pull a Norse, because even with the Norse, there should still be a few thousand Norse in Sweden. And just saying, there should still be Slavic pagans all around the principalities. Not everybody was Eastern Orthodox, even if it was a more or less superficial process. If you like us to add this religion and some percentage of the population adhering to it, then I'd ask you for specific sources that could help us portray it. So isolated references to it being followers here or there won't be helpful, whilst academic sources saying up to X% of the population was following Slavic rite might very much be. Okay. Here's my take on this. There's no book that says percentage of Eastern Orthodox in the Russian principalities. Up to X% of the population following Orthodox rites. But we know that they were Orthodox because the process of converting to Orthodoxy happened over a few hundred years by this point. So most of them were Orthodox, but not all of them. The reality is, I will give some sources here, okay? But these sources do not tell you this amount of people were Slavic pagans. It does mention that there were some. It does mention quite a few entire areas that followed certain pagan rituals. But just like there's no specific book that says everybody was Orthodox or 20% of the population were Orthodox, because that's not how history works. These don't mention a percentage specifically. The purpose of these books is to offer perspective and a scholarly analysis that contributes to better understanding the religious dynamic of the region in 1337, because that's just how it works with history. You cannot just quote one paragraph like some people do and say, look, everybody was this or that because this one paragraph said. That's not how it works. You got to read entire books and get a better understanding of the picture of that particular period, what it was like before, what it was like after. Because, for example, there's books that mention pagan rituals 300 years later in the 1700s. That wouldn't be mentioned in books at the time if there weren't still followers at the time, and it wouldn't be any followers at the time if there were none in 1337, for example, okay? So this is a very flawed argument here to ask for a specific percentage of population that follow that particular religion in a book, because you're never going to get that with anything in general, unless it's a very specific, like a book dedicated to that, like say a demographics or a census or something of the sorts, right? Which we wouldn't have anyway, because that wasn't the case in Eastern Europe at the time. You didn't have that much. It wasn't like the Byzantines or something like that. I could say recommend Kievan, Russia by George Vernadsky, which doesn't necessarily talk about 1337, but talks about the process of turning from paganism to Christianity by the Kievan Rus and the followers after Kievan Rus, and the process and how slow it was and how it didn't happen overnight and how it took hundreds of years, and how in the 1200s we still had a massive amount of pagans, especially in these areas here on the map itself. So I don't know, man. I don't want to say that there was 50% Slavic pagans, because there wasn't. There was probably like maybe 10 or 8%. It would make sense to say that there was none. Now back on this map, because I have a very big gripe with it. First off, what is this? What is this? Is this shamanism? This should be the Suomensko shamanism thing, right? That's good. That should be like that. And I am happy to see some animists around here, I guess for the minority tribes and so on. Shamanists as well. Cool. Here's the big gripe though. The Golden Horde became Muslim literally a few years prior to the start date. The leader of the Golden Horde converted to Islam at the start of the 1300s, and the entirety of the realm was not everybody Tatars, okay? If anything, it was a massive mix-up of Ruthenians, that means Eastern European Orthodox primarily, but not everybody, of course. There was a lot of Nestorians, actually. There was a lot of Tengri followers. In fact, a huge amount of Tengri followers, especially the further north you went around the Golden Horde areas, there were more Tengri followers. Clearly, there was a majority of Muslims, Sunni followers, and the Khan himself did start an intense process of Islamization of the entirety of the Horde, but that was not instant. And we have records that by his death around the 40s, 1340s, Sunni was still not a majority in all of the Golden Horde. So it wouldn't make sense to see this. This is literally 100% Sunni majority with the small exception that is animist here and a little bit more animist here. That makes no sense. First off, you would have at least a couple of pockets of Tengri, if not a lot of pockets of Tengri. You got to remember that the reason that Islam is so predominant here is because the leadership converted to Islam, but that didn't mean that it was an instant sort of thing. It gradually started converting the rest of the population as time went on. In 1337, I would beg that most of the Turkic origin Mongols and the Mongol leaderships, the elites, would be the ones following Islam, whilst the rest would be an amalgamation of everything else. So I'm just gonna say that this is probably because they haven't finished this area, because he also mentions that we should only take into account the Russian principalities with this dev diary, not everything else, which is why I'm gonna let it, you know, be as it is. I'm assuming that it's not yet finished. Now on to the trade good map mode. We've got a buttload of iron over by the hills and mountains of the Urals, copper as well, a ton of lumber. I feel like half of the lumber of the world is actually in Eastern Europe, which is accurate. Even today, I think that's probably the case. We've got a lot of fur, also very accurate. Wild game, of course. Wheat in the farmland producing areas. We got a lot of sand for some reason. I'm saying more sand than I've seen in pretty much all the other maps, actually. Clay, we've got quite a little bit of. Medicaments over here as well. Wheat, of course. Fish in the north. Wild game. More fur. Marble, actually, over here. Horses. A lot more horses around the Golden Horde, which makes sense. You know, their main source of transport and conquest was horses. I'm not seeing any saltpeter, though. Unless I'm just really blind, which I wouldn't rule it out, actually. So if you guys see any saltpeter, let me know. Because if there's no saltpeter, I would assume saltpeter is going to be required for weapons, or at least for ammunition, right? For gunpowder. If it's not required, then that's no issue. But then why do you have the saltpeter trade good, right? It means it will be required, logically thinking about this. And that means that the Russians will need to go into the east to get saltpeter, most likely. The current markets are Novgorod, Moscow, and Kazan. So we do have quite a bit of a difference here compared to how it is in EU4. So there's a lot more of a linear sort of approach to the markets, with Kazan having a buttload of provinces, Moscow as well, Novgorod too, and pretty much all three of them being kind of equal in size. I do assume that Moscow is going to be the stronger one considering the amount of provinces and the provinces that they do own. But then again, Novgorod is definitely going to be an important trade center too, since it was historically. These are the current population: 700,000 in Moscow, 700,000 in Nizhny Novgorod, 6.2 million in the Great Horde. Holy snaps, that's a lot of Horde boys. And with this, I also want to make one point about the population. As you guys know, the Black Death did affect Europe a lot. It wiped out pretty much half of the population in England and France and so on, but Eastern Europe was not as affected as Western Europe, in part because Eastern Europe had dealt with various plagues in the past and they did build up an immunity to it, and then another part because it was a lot more sparse because of the previous plagues that they dealt with, right? And because of warfare and so on, of course, too. And because of that, I'm not sure how the plague's going to affect the peoples in EU5, but considering that Eastern Europe is going to start with significantly less population than Western Europe, unless there is a modifier that makes Eastern Europeans more resilient to the Black Plague, then that's going to be really unbalanced, because Eastern Europe is going to lose half of the 6 million, which is 3 million, and Western Europe's going to lose half of the 12 million, which is 6 million. So Western Europe's going to come out on top, which shouldn't really be the case. It should maintain a specific balance throughout the campaign, right? Anyway, that's pretty much it for today. Next week is Carpathia and the Balkans, and boy, is that going to be a juicy one, because as you guys know, I am a Romanian, and I'm going to be extremely brutal with the feedback on that one. So that better be the most historically accurate one I've seen so far, or this is going straight to Tinto, okay? I'm gonna fly over to Barcelona and I'm gonna make them read the same books I'm reading. We're gonna go each paragraph one by one. That's how much I love, and I want to see it do. Hope you guys are on the same page with me. Love you all, and I'll see you in the next